In the previous video, I introduced you to the security of the Moralis database, and that specifically dealt with things like keys, but also access control lists and class level permissions, ACLs and CLPs. And they're super useful because it can give you control over the user-based permissioning of data inside of your Moralis database. But you're specifying directly a set of users associated with an instance of an object. So in one of my tables here, we've set that certain users are able to access these particular rows and others are not. Some have public read and write access. And so we've got some kind of control over who can access the data inside of this database. And that's fine when the database is quite small. But as the application becomes a lot larger, it's more difficult to manage who has access and who doesn't. The more common way of handling the permissioning is to assign roles. So in a CMS, you typically have an administrator role, maybe an editor role, and each of those roles would have different permissions. And you could assign users to those particular roles, and it would take effect throughout the whole database. And that option is available with the Moralis database. So roles will provide a logical way of grouping users with common privileges to the Moralis data. As standard, you don't have any roles set up. They're completely empty. It's a class on its own that you can add roles to. And you're welcome to add roles manually if you want to, or you can use code. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do in this tutorial. So once we've created a role and we've produced a control list of what it can and can't do permission-wise, we will then be able to go inside of our objects and take a look at them in here. We would be able to assign a role to a specific object or just ensure that any new object we create has that preset. So again, this table is a table of units. It's to do with a game. And the code that we had to create these units was over here. I had a class method called create that automatically creates the unit. And in a previous section, we looked at setting an ACL. It was just a blanket access control list. And in this video, we're going to make that a little bit more specific now because that is just too general. Let me show you what I mean. If we go back to the documentation and just quickly going back to our security section, in our object level access control, this is what we previously used. But now I want to split that up. So not only do we have object level access control, but we have role level access control as well, which means I need to make use of these, or specifically this method, set write access and set read access. And on top of that, I'm also going to set the role write access and the role read access. So there'll be 4 methods that I'm going to use there instead of just a blanket one that does it for specifically the user. If I come back to the code, there are a few things that I'm going to need to do here. So we're going to create a new ACL, but also outside of this create unit class, just want to write a couple of new functions. First function that I'll do is just to create a brand new role. And the second function will be to add users. Add users to role. Now we can call these functions and build them into our application somehow. So if we start with this one here, let's just call this one create role. We'll make it asynchronous. And inside the function body, we'll do 2 things. We need to assign an ACL here, and then we need to create the role. Creating the role is nice and simple. We can just run new Moralis role as per the documentation. And we want to be using the Moralis role property here. And to create a new Moralis role, we're going to be rewriting something similar to this. So we'll let our new role be a new Moralis.role instance. We need to give it 2 things. We need to give it a name and we need to give it an ACL, which we've not yet written. So we'll do that up here. Finish that in a moment. And we'll just call this something like the admin. Once we've finished, we can save it. And then we need to write some ACL. So we'll just do a new Moralis.acl. And inside of that, we need to set the public read access and the public write access. We'll set those both to true. There we go. So now we've created a new role-based ACL. We can pass that into our new Moralis role. So whenever we run this function, we will have a new role. And what you could do is make this function a little bit more complex. So you could pass in some arguments here. So maybe you'd pass in the name. Instead of hard coding the admin, maybe you would name it in the function call. You could declare these as part of the function call as well and pass those in, however you want to work it. But for now, I'm just going to hard code it. So we'll save that, go back to our application, refresh, and then we'll run create role. It will return a promise. And if we go back to our dashboard and refresh, we should, in the role, see one. We do. Excellent. So we've got a brand new role here called admin. We're not using it anywhere in our application, and we also don't have any users assigned to it yet. That's the next thing we need to do. We need to go and assign some users. So what we'll do here for the add user function is we'll run a query where we'll search for this admin role. We'll get that result back, and then we'll add the current logged in user to that admin role. Let's call it something like add users to role. We'll make it asynchronous. And inside of the function body, we will do a couple of things. So we need to create a new query. So we'll run a new Moralis query, and we need to check inside the Moralis.role table. Then with that, so we want to check the name field. And perhaps what we'll do is we'll pass in a name into this function. So when we run the function, we'll run in a string of the admin. And then it will check the name field in our database under the role. We'll check the name for the admin. Okay, so that's that bit. What do we need to do then? We want to get a result. So we'll get the first one back. And we'll await that. And if we get something back, then we want to add users to it. So how do we do that? So let's go over to the documentation. You can add users and roles by using this code here. So we want to do the add users to role. So for us, we can use the method getUsers and then chain the add method to that as well. Let's go back to the code. So we can do result, getUsers, and then we will chain current logged in user. And then after that, we need to save it. Looks good. So add users to role, I'll save that. Go back to the front end. And we'll do a search for the admin. Okay, I have an error. Query is not defined. Line 181. I want a query. Okay, because it's role query. There we go. Copy that, save it again. Go back. Run that again. And now, if I go back into the database and refresh that, and if we click in users, we should, yeah, there we go. We see a new user added to that role. I'll just come back to the application. I'll log out. I'll go and sign in with a different one. This one is 65D. And we'll log in with this one. Then we will rerun that function, go back to the database, and now we should see two. There we go, two users that are now part of the admin role. Excellent. The final thing we need to do is come back to this ACL for whenever we create a new unit. And rather than have this blanket ACL, we now need to set one. So every new unit gives the admin access to read and write it. So I'm going to blank this one out and write some new code in here. So I'll take this line here. So we'll let our ACL now be a new Moralis ACL. And then we'll start adding some things to that. There's four things that we need. We need to set the read access and the write access. There'll be two things in here. We need to pass the user, and that's true. Because it's not set public read access, it sets user specific. We're going to be passing in our user into this and give them the true flag. So the user will be able to read and write, but the public will not. And we also need to set the role write access. What I'll do is I'll copy both of these, And instead of the user, we'll now call the role. And for us, it's going to be the admin. And make that a string as well. And we'll pass in the ACL there, and then you can save the unit. So if we save that, and we'll go and create a few units to test this out. 1, 2, 3, 4, however many. If I refresh this, go over to our units, we should have more than 56 now. We've got 60. And if we go and take a look at the access control list, we can see that not only has the user got read and write access, but also the role of admin has read and write access as well. And now every time a new user is added, the admin will be created. So you don't need to handle your users anymore. You just need to make sure that the role of the admin, the users that are in here, are correctly managed. So that's just one role, but you could do that multiple times. So that's just the admin role, and you could set different permissions for each one. And you could have hundreds of different roles if you wanted to, and apply them to your tables in whichever way you like. So now we know how to set access control lists, class level permissions, but also roles and access control lists for those roles. So I hope that video helped. Take a look through the rest of the documentation in here to explain a few things about role objects, also role-based security for other objects and role hierarchy. But the video shows you how to not only change the details in the dashboard, but how to write those permissions inside of your code.